The council chamber was in chaos. Voices shouted over each other in dozens of languages, translated instantly by the station's computers. Holographic images flooded the center of the massive room, showing star systems painted in red. Each red marker meant death. Each one meant billions of lives lost. Councillor Taman stood at the speaker's platform, his forearms raised high. He was a Keltharian, a species known across the galaxy for their wisdom and patience. But today there was no patience in his voice, only fear. 17 systems, he said, and the room fell quiet. 17 systems consumed in 3 months. The Varathian swarm does not negotiate. It does not stop. It only feeds and grows stronger. The holographic display shifted. Images of the swarm filled the air. Massive ships that looked like they were made of metal and flesh twisted together. Smaller creatures by the millions, each one hungry and deadly. They moved like a living wave across space, eating everything in their path. Admiral Hyunwoo stepped forward from the Keltharian delegation. He was a military commander, his body covered in medals and scars from 100 battles. "We have thrown everything at them," he said, his voice hard. "Energy weapons, kinetic missiles, quantum bombs. They adapt to all of it. What kills them today does nothing tomorrow." A representative from the Phosian Collective spoke next, their voice like wind chimes. "Our psychic attacks failed. They turned our own hive ships against us. We lost 4 worlds before we could retreat." Around the chamber, leaders from 73 different species nodded. Each had their own story of loss. Each had tried and failed to stop the swarm. Taman brought up a new image, a single star system with 6 planets. "This is Threshold. If it falls, the swarm reaches the core worlds. If the core falls, the galaxy falls with it. We have one chance to stop them here." "How long?" someone asked. 3 weeks until they reach Threshold," Taman said. "Maybe less." The chamber erupted again. Species began pledging their fleets. The Keltharians promised 2,000 warships. The Targon Collective would send their war beasts, living ships the size of moons. The crystalline Phosians would rebuild their forces and bring 3,000 vessels. On and on it went, each species offering what they could. By the end, the number was staggering. Over 5 million ships would gather at Threshold. It would be the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Then a quiet voice spoke. "Earth will send aid." The chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to a small section near the back. There stood Ambassador Ji-Wan, the human representative to the council. She was small compared to most species in the room. Humans were a young species, only 200 years in the galactic community. They were known for being curious and adaptable, but not for military might. Admiral Hyunwoo looked at her with interest. "The humans have been quiet about their military capabilities," he said. "We have heard rumors of a hidden fleet, ships built in secret waiting for a time like this. How many can Earth send?" Ji-Won smiled. It was a calm, knowing smile. "Earth will send 1 ship." The silence stretched for a long moment. Then someone laughed. Another joined in. Soon half the chamber was laughing or making sounds of disbelief. "1 ship?" Hyunwoo said, his voice cold. "We face extinction and Earth sends 1 ship? Is this a joke?" Ji-Won's smile never wavered. "It is not a joke, Admiral. Earth is sending the ship that is needed. 1 will be sufficient." "Sufficient?" a Targon commander roared. "We are bringing millions of ships. The swarm has consumed 17 systems. And you bring 1? "This is an insult," another voice called out. "Humanity shows its true colors. They hide behind the Council's protection but offer nothing in return." Taman raised his arms for silence, but the chamber ignored him. Accusations flew. Some called for humanity to be expelled from the Council. Others demanded they contribute more or be branded as cowards. Through it all, Ji-Won stood calm and quiet. She waited for the anger to exhaust itself. When the chamber finally quieted, she spoke again. "I understand your concerns," she said. "You see numbers and think that is what wins wars. You may be right, but Earth has studied the reports on the swarm. We have analyzed every battle, every failure. We know what is needed, and what is needed is 1 ship." Hyunwoo asked, his voice dripping with scorn. "Yes," Ji-Won said simply. "The ship is already on its way. It will arrive at Threshold in 2 weeks. I suggest you save your judgment until you see what humanity brings to this fight." With that, she bowed politely and left the chamber. The room exploded into conversation again. Most dismissed the human contribution as worthless. Some felt insulted. A few, like Taman, remained quiet and thoughtful. Hyunwoo approached Taemin after the session ended. "What do you make of this?" he asked. Taemin was silent for a moment, accessing old files in the council database. "I have been reading about humanity," he said slowly. "They are a strange species. Peaceful, curious, friendly, but there are gaps in their history. Periods they do not like to discuss." "What kind of gaps?" "War," Taemin said. "Before they reached the stars, humans fought each other for thousands of years. The records are disturbing. They developed weapons we have never conceived of, tactics that make our battles look like children playing. But they gave all that up when they joined the council," Hyunwoo said. "They signed the military limitation treaties." "They disarmed, did they?" Taemin asked quietly. "Or did they simply put their weapons away and hope they would never need them again?" Before Hyunwoo could respond, an alert sounded through the station. Long-range sensors had detected something. A ship dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. It was small. A frigate-class vessel by galactic standards. The design was angular and industrial, covered in what looked like welded patches and hasty repairs. It looked like it had been through 100 battles and barely survived each one. The identification signal came through clearly. It was the human contribution. One ship called the Indomitable. Taemin and Hyunwoo looked at the sensor data in silence. The ship was small. It was old. It looked like it would fall apart if someone looked at it wrong. This was what humanity sent to save the galaxy. "Insulting," Hyunwoo muttered and walked away. But Taemin continued to stare at the screen. Something about the ship bothered him. The sensor readings were strange. There were gaps in the data, places where the ship's structure didn't make sense. Hidden spaces, shielded compartments, and the power signature, though currently low, had the capacity to spike much higher. Much, much higher. Taemin felt a chill run through his body. Maybe, just maybe, the humans knew exactly what they were doing, and maybe everyone else was about to learn why humanity had been so quiet about their military capabilities. The Indomitable was coming, and with it, the galaxy was about to discover what humans really were beneath their peaceful exterior. The staging area above Threshold Prime was a sight to behold. Thousands of warships floated in organized formations, their hulls gleaming under the system's twin stars. Sleek Keltharian dreadnoughts stretched for kilometers, their weapons arrays visible even from a distance. The crystalline Phosian hive ships caught the light and scattered it in beautiful patterns. Massive Targan war beasts, living ships grown rather than built, pulsed with organic energy. It was the greatest military force ever assembled. 5 million ships ready to face the end of everything. And then there was the Indomitable. The human ship looked tiny next to the alien warships. It was only 300 meters long, barely bigger than a shuttle by some standards. The hull was dark gray, covered in welded plates and patches. It looked like someone had taken spare parts from a dozen different ships and somehow made them work together. Captain Daeho stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the massive alien fleet through the view screen. He was a middle-aged man with gray streaking through his black hair. His face was lined with wrinkles, each one a story from his years serving in Earth's corporate wars. He had seen combat before humanity joined the galactic community. Back when humans only fought each other. "They don't look impressed," Lieutenant Bora said from her station. She was young, maybe 25, with sharp eyes and quick hands. This was her first deep space assignment, and she was eager to prove herself. "Can't blame them," Chief Engineer Kyung-soo grumbled from the engineering console. He was older than Daeho, his hands scarred from decades of working with machines. "We look like a garbage scow compared to those fancy ships." "We look like we've been through hell," Commander Subin said quietly. She was Daeho's first officer, a former Special Forces operative who rarely smiled. "Because we have. Every patch on this hull is a story. Every weld is a lesson learned." Dr. Haewan, who served as both science officer and medical doctor due to the small crew size, looked up from her station. "Captain, we're being hailed by Threshold Command. They're granting us docking permission, but they sound confused." "Put them through," Daeho said. A Keltharian officer appeared on the screen, all four of his arms moving as he checked different displays. "Human vessel Indomitable, you are cleared to dock at Station 12. Please be aware that several fleet commanders wish to meet with you upon arrival." "Understood," Daeho said. "We'll be there in 20 minutes, the connection cut." Bora turned to face her captain. "Sir, do you think they'll listen to us?" "No," Daeho said simply. But that's okay. They'll see soon enough. The Indomitable docked without incident. The crew of 57 gathered in the small cargo bay that served as their main meeting area. They looked like a mismatched group compared to the gleaming alien warriors they were about to meet. Most wore simple gray uniforms that had seen better days. Some carried tools or data pads. They looked like engineers and scientists, not soldiers. The airlock opened and they stepped onto Threshold Station. Waiting for them was an assembly of alien commanders that represented the might of the galaxy. Admiral Hyunwoo stood at the front, his medals catching the light. Behind him were dozens of other leaders, each commanding fleets of thousands. Hyunwoo looked at the human crew. His eyes swept over their small numbers, their simple uniforms, their unremarkable appearance. His expression hardened. "Captain Daeho, I presume?" he said, his voice cold. "That's right," Daeho said, extending his hand. Hyunwoo looked at it for a moment before reluctantly shaking it with one of his 4 hands. "I will be direct," Hyunwoo said. "Is this some kind of joke? We face the greatest threat the galaxy has ever known. And Earth sends 57 people in a ship that looks ready to fall apart." "The Indomitable is tougher than she looks," Daeho said calmly. "I'm sure," Hyunwoo said, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "Perhaps you can explain what your ship is capable of. What weapon systems do you bring to this fight?" Daeho glanced at Subin, who pulled up a datapad. "We have Mark 7 kinetic accelerators, quantum destabilizers, nanite deployment systems, causality mines, and antimatter catalyzed fusion warheads. We also have biological and chemical options, though we prefer not to use those unless absolutely necessary." The alien commanders looked at each other in confusion. Most of those weapon types were unfamiliar. A few were banned by galactic law as too inhumane for warfare. One commander, a Phosian, spoke up. "These weapons, we have never heard of most of them. Are they experimental?" "No," Daeho said. "They're old, very old. Humanity developed them a long time ago. Back when we fought each other, we hoped we'd never need them again." "But you kept them," Hyunwoo said. "We kept the knowledge," Subin corrected. "The Indomitable is the only ship we built with these systems. We hoped it would stay in storage forever." "One ship with ancient weapons," another commander laughed. "This is truly what humanity offers?" The mockery spread through the assembled commanders. Some laughed openly. Others shook their heads in disbelief or disgust. A few looked genuinely insulted that humanity had sent so little. Through it all, the crew of the Indomitable remained calm. They had expected this reaction. Daeho met each mocking gaze with steady eyes, waiting for the laughter to die down. Only Counselor Taemin, watching from the side, did not laugh. He studied the humans carefully, noting their confidence, their calm in the face of ridicule. He had read the old reports. He knew that humans did not bluff. Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Red lights flashed. Every commander's communication device activated at once. "The swarm!" someone shouted. "They're here early." The commanders rushed to the nearest displays. There, on the long-range sensors, was the Varathian swarm. It was massive, filling the screens with countless ships. They were hours ahead of schedule, moving faster than any prediction had suggested. 4 hours until contact, Hyunwoo said, his voice tight. "All commanders to your ships. We hold the line at the outer planets. We cannot let them reach Threshold Prime." The station erupted into organized chaos as commanders rushed back to their vessels. Hyunwoo turned to Daeho one last time. "Captain, I suggest you take your ship to the rear of the formation. Provide logistical support to our supply lines. Stay out of the way of the real fighting." It was a dismissal and insult wrapped in military courtesy. The human ship was being told to hide while the real warriors did the fighting. Daeho nodded. "Understood, Admiral. We'll be where we're needed." Hyunwoo hurried away without another word. Soon, only the human crew remained in the corridor. Bora's face was red with anger. "Logistical support?" she said. "Sir, we came here to fight, not to watch from the back." "Easy, Lieutenant," Daeho said. "We'll be in the fight soon enough. First, let them try it their way. They need to understand what they're facing. And if they fail?" Kyung-soo asked. "They will fail," Subin said quietly. "The swarm adapts to everything. We've seen the reports. Every conventional weapon just makes it stronger." "That's why we're here," Daeho said. "We brought unconventional weapons. We brought things the galaxy forgot or chose to leave behind. Things that don't play by the rules." Dr. Haewon looked worried. "Captain, if we use those weapons, the other species will see what humanity is capable of. They'll know what we used to be." I know, Deho said softly, and I wish we didn't have to show them. But the swarm doesn't care about our peaceful reputation. It doesn't care that we've spent 200 years trying to be better than we were. Sometimes the only way to protect peace is to remember what war truly is. The crew was silent for a moment. They all knew what was in their ship's weapons bays. They all knew what humanity had been capable of during its darkest years. They had hoped the galaxy would never have to see that side of their species, but hope wasn't enough anymore. Let's get back to the ship, Deho said. Kyungsoo, I want the reactor ready for full combat power. Bora, start running targeting solutions. Subin, weapons check. Haewon, make sure the medical bay is prepped. As they walked back to their ship, Kyungsoo muttered, 4 hours. That's all the time they have to figure out they need us. They'll figure it out in 3, Subin said. The swarm is faster than they think. And meaner. Deho said nothing. He simply looked out the viewport at the assembled alien fleet, magnificent and proud and completely unprepared for what was coming. In a few hours, they would learn the hard way that numbers weren't enough. That technology wasn't enough. That sometimes winning required being willing to do terrible things. And when that moment came, the Indomitable would be ready. The Varathian swarm emerged from the darkness of space like a living nightmare. Where the Allied fleet was organized and beautiful, the swarm was chaos and horror made real. Ships that looked like they were made of twisted metal and rotting flesh, held together by things that shouldn't exist. Smaller creatures by the millions, each one a combination of machine and organic matter, all of them hungry. Admiral Hyunwoo stood on the bridge of his flagship, the pride of Keltharia. Around him, his officers worked quickly and efficiently. On the tactical display, the swarm was a red mass that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. 5 million ships against their billions, his tactical officer said. But we have the defensive position. We have prepared fortifications. We can hold them. We will hold them, Hyunwoo corrected. We must. There is no other option. In the rear of the formation, far from the front lines, the Indomitable waited. Bora watched the battle displays from her tactical station, her fingers drumming impatiently on her console. They're starting their attack run, she said, energy signatures spiking across their front line. This is it. Captain Deho sat in his command chair, perfectly still. His eyes were fixed on the display, but his expression was calm. Almost sad. How long do you give them, Subin? The first officer checked her own displays. 15 minutes before they start taking heavy casualties. 20 before the line starts to break. I say 12 minutes, Kyungsoo called from engineering. The swarm learns fast. Real fast, let's hope you're all wrong, Deho said quietly. The Allied fleet opened fire. It was a sight that should have inspired hope. Energy beams in every color imaginable lanced through space, each one powerful enough to destroy a city. Kinetic rounds fired from railguns created clouds of deadly metal moving at a fraction of light speed. Exotic weapons that warped space-time itself, that turned matter into energy, that reached across dimensions to strike at the swarm. The first wave of swarm ships simply ceased to exist. Thousands of them gone in an instant. The organic metal hulls couldn't withstand the coordinated fire from millions of weapons. They burst apart, melted, or were torn to pieces. On the pride of Keltharia, cheers erupted from the crew. Hyunwoo allowed himself a small smile. Perhaps they had been worried for nothing. Perhaps the combined might of the galaxy was enough after all. Then the swarm adapted. It happened so fast that most sensors couldn't track it. The remaining swarm ships began to change. Their hulls shifted, armor plates moving and rearranging themselves. The energy shields that had been useless moments before suddenly harmonized to match the frequency of incoming beams, deflecting them harmlessly. The metal-flesh hybrid of their construction hardened against kinetic impacts, absorbing and dissipating the energy. Impossible, Hyunwoo's tactical officer whispered. They adapted in seconds. Our weapons are only half as effective now. Increase fire rate, Hyunwoo ordered. Pour everything we have into them. Don't give them time to adapt further. But the swarm was already learning from each shot that hit them. With every attack, they became more resistant. What had been devastating strikes became glancing blows. What had been lethal became merely inconvenient. And then the swarm began to fight back. Their weapons were unlike anything in the galactic arsenal. Biological projectiles that ate through shields and armor like acid. Energy weapons that didn't just destroy but corrupted, turning disabled ships into new swarm vessels. Creatures that could survive in the vacuum of space, clinging to ship hulls and tearing through them with claws and teeth that could shred metal. The Phosian hive ships attempted their psychic assault. It was a weapon that had won them a dozen wars, the ability to reach into enemy minds and shut them down. They projected their collective consciousness toward the swarm, expecting to overwhelm the lesser intelligence controlling it. Instead, the swarm welcomed them in. The psychic connection worked both ways. The Phosian consciousness touched the mind of the swarm and realized their terrible mistake. It wasn't a lesser intelligence. It was vast, ancient, hungry beyond understanding. It had consumed entire civilizations and learned from each one. And now it was learning from the Phosians. 4 Phosian hive ships stopped firing. Their crystalline hulls turned from blue to sickly red. Then they turned their weapons on their own allies. Pull back the Phosian contingent, Hyunwoo shouted. All ships concentrate fire on the corrupted vessels. Chaos spread through the formation. Ships moved to avoid their former allies while still trying to engage the swarm. The perfect defensive line began to fragment. On the Indomitable, the crew watched in grim silence. They had seen this before in the reports. The swarm didn't just adapt to weapons, it adapted to tactics, to strategies, to every trick the galaxy tried. 12 minutes, Kyung-soo said quietly. I was right. They lasted 12 minutes. Bora looked at her captain. Sir, we have to help them. Not yet, Daeho said. They need to understand that conventional warfare won't work. If we step in too early, they'll never learn. They'll keep trying the same things that don't work. But people are dying, Dr. Haewon said, her voice pained. I know, Daeho said, and there was real sorrow in his voice. But more will die if we don't let them see the truth. The swarm can't be beaten with traditional weapons. It needs something different. Something terrible. On the Pride of Keltharia, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The casualty reports were coming in faster than the computers could process them. The Keltharian Third Fleet had lost 40% of its ships in less than 15 minutes. Other species were reporting similar losses. Admiral, the Targan war beasts are breaking formation, an officer reported. They're attempting a close-range assault. Hyunwoo wanted to order them back, but he knew it wouldn't help. Each species was fighting the way they knew how, using the tactics that had won them wars before. But this wasn't a normal war. This was something none of them had prepared for. The Targan war beasts. Living ships the size of moons charged into the swarm. They were creatures of war, bred and grown over centuries to be the ultimate weapons. Their organic weapons could tear through anything. Their sheer mass could crush enemy fleets. The swarm welcomed them. It swarmed over the war beasts like parasites burrowing into their living hulls. The great creatures screamed, their distress signals audible across every frequency. One by one they began to change. Their flesh twisted and warped. Their weapons turned against the Allied fleet. We've lost 16 war beasts to corruption, the tactical officer said, his voice hollow. They're turning into swarm vessels. Hyunwoo felt something he had never experienced in all his years of service. True cold fear. They were losing. Not just losing battles or ships, but losing the war. Every weapon they used seemed to make the swarm stronger. Every tactic was countered within minutes. All ships fighting retreat, he ordered. Fall back to secondary positions. We need time to regroup and reassess. But the swarm wasn't giving them time. It pressed forward, sensing weakness. The organized fleet became a desperate mob trying to escape. Ships collided with each other in their panic. Discipline broke down as survival became the only goal. The swarm broke through the defensive line. There was nothing between them and Threshold Prime now. Nothing between them and 4 billion civilians who couldn't escape in time. Hyunwoo's communication console lit up. It was Counselor Taemin, calling from his observation post on Threshold Station. Admiral, Taemin said, and his voice was steady despite the chaos. I think it's time to ask the humans for help. They have one ship, Hyunwoo said bitterly. What can one ship do that 5 million could not? I don't know, Taemin admitted. But I think we're about to find out. I'm contacting them now. On the Indomitable, the call came through. Captain Daeho listened to Counselor Taemin's request, his face expressionless. Captain Daeho, can your people help? Taemin asked. Daeho was silent for a long moment. Then he stood from his chair. We were wondering when you'd ask. Lieutenant Bora, take us in. Chief Kyung-soo, bring the reactor to full combat output. Kyung-soo's hands flew across his console, removing all safety limiters. Reactor at 20%, 40, 60, 80, full combat power achieved. The Indomitable's power signature exploded. Every sensor in the system locked onto the human ship as its output increased not by double or triple, but by 50 times its previous reading. The small, unremarkable frigate suddenly blazed like a star. "What is that?" Someone shouted across the fleet communications. "What are the humans doing?" The Indomitable began to move. It accelerated toward the swarm at speeds that should have been impossible for a ship its size. The patched, welded hull began to shift. Plates retracted, revealing weapon systems that had been hidden beneath the surface. Admiral Hyunwoo watched on his displays as the human ship approached the swarm. It looked like a single spark, flying toward an ocean of darkness. "This is madness," he whispered. On the Indomitable, Captain Daeho gave his final orders. "Dr. Haewon, release containment safeties. Subin, weapons free. Let's show them what humans brought to the galaxy." Bo-Ra's voice was steady as she spoke. "Entering weapons range in 10 seconds. All systems green. Ready to engage." "Fire," Daeho said quietly, and the galaxy learned what humanity had been hiding. The Indomitable entered the swarm formation alone. To the watching alien fleets, it looked like suicide. One small ship against billions of enemy vessels. One spark against an ocean of teeth and hunger. Then the ship's hull opened like a flower of death. The hidden weapon systems emerged from beneath the patched armor plating. Dozens of them, each one different, each one wrong in ways that made experienced warriors flinch when they saw the sensor readings. These were not the clean weapons of galactic warfare. These were something older, something that had been born in the dark periods of human history when their species fought only themselves. "Firing kinetic harpoons," Bo-Ra said, her voice cold and professional. The first weapons launched. They looked simple at first, just metal spears fired at incredible speed. They punched through swarm ships like paper, penetrating deep into their cores. Then they detonated. Nuclear fire bloomed inside the enemy vessels. But these weren't normal nuclear weapons. They were designed to maximize damage, to create secondary reactions, to ensure nothing survived. Swarm ships didn't just explode. They were torn apart from the inside, their hybrid flesh-metal hulls unable to contain the fury of human-designed destruction. The swarm tried to adapt. Their armor shifted, trying to deflect or absorb the harpoons. But each harpoon was different. Each one had a different penetration method, a different detonation sequence. There was nothing to adapt to because the weapon changed with every shot. "Nanite swarms away," Subin reported, manually controlling a weapons console. Clouds of microscopic machines erupted from the Indomitable's hull. They looked like silver mist on the sensors, beautiful and delicate. They hit the swarm vessels and began to work. The nanites didn't just damage. They disassembled. At the molecular level, they took apart everything they touched. Metal became atoms. Flesh became base proteins. Complex swarm ships dissolved into clouds of their component elements all in the span of seconds. The Galactic Council had banned nanite weapons 300 years ago. They had called them inhumane, too dangerous, too indiscriminate. Humanity had agreed to the ban, but they had kept the knowledge, kept the designs, waiting for a day when inhumane was exactly what was needed. "Quantum destabilizers firing," Bo-Ra said. These weapons were something the galaxy had never conceived of. They reached into the quantum foam of reality itself and twisted it. Swarm ships didn't explode or dissolve. They simply stopped existing. They phased out of reality, gone to somewhere else or nowhere at all. The space they had occupied rippled and warped, making other nearby swarm vessels unstable. Captain Daeho watched the tactical display with calm eyes. "Biological package Pattern 7. Pattern 7 confirmed," Subin said. "Deploying. Canisters launched from the Indomitable." They burst open in the middle of swarm formations, releasing engineered viruses and bacteria. The galactic community had banned biological weapons as the ultimate evil. But humans had spent thousands of years perfecting them, back when they only had each other to fight. These weren't natural diseases. These were weapons designed in laboratories, built to target specific structures in swarm organisms. The virus spread through the swarm's organic components, eating them from inside. Ships began to rot in space, their flesh components dying faster than the swarm could regenerate them. The swarm tried to adapt its biology, to create antibodies or resistance, but humans had been fighting biological warfare for millennia. For every defense the swarm created, the virus mutated into 3 new strains, each one deadlier than the last. On the Pride of Keltharia, Admiral Hyunwoo watched in horror and awe. "What are they doing?" he whispered. "Those weapons. They're banned. They're crimes against galactic law. They're saving us," Counselor Taemin said quietly. He was watching from the same bridge, having transferred there when the fighting started. This is what humanity was before they joined the Council. This is what they put away and hoped to never use again. "Causality mines deployed," Bora announced. These were perhaps the most disturbing weapons in the Indomitable's arsenal. They were mines that exploded backward through time. When a swarm ship triggered one, the explosion happened 5 seconds in the past. The ship would be destroyed by a blast that had occurred before it even reached the mine's location. It violated every understanding of cause and effect, every rule of temporal mechanics. The swarm tried to adapt, tried to create defenses. But how do you defend against something that has already killed you? How do you adapt to a weapon that strikes before you know it exists? "Antimatter-catalyzed fusion missiles, full spread," Daeho ordered. The missiles launched, leaving trails of blue fire. Each one carried a warhead measured in teratons. When they hit, they didn't just destroy swarm ships. They destroyed everything around them. The explosions created miniature stars that burned for seconds before fading, leaving nothing but empty space where thousands of swarm vessels had been. The sheer destructive power was beyond anything the galactic fleet had brought. A single missile could do what entire fleets couldn't, and the Indomitable carried hundreds of them. In the engineering section, Kyung-soo watched his displays with worried eyes. "Captain, reactor temperature rising. We're pushing past safety limits. If we keep this up, we're going to have containment problems." "How long can you give me?" Daeho asked. 20 minutes at current output," Kyung-soo said. "Maybe 30 if I start venting coolant and bypass some non-essential systems." "Do it," Daeho said. "We need every second." The swarm began to retreat. It was something they had never done before, according to all the reports. The Varathian swarm didn't retreat. It adapted and overwhelmed. But here now, facing weapons it couldn't adapt to, it ran. "They're trying to escape," Bora said, surprise in her voice. "Don't let them," Daeho said, his voice hard. "Subin pursuit course. We follow them until they're dead or we are." The Indomitable accelerated, chasing the fleeing swarm. Behind them, the Allied fleet watched in stunned silence. Some began to follow, but most simply held position, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Taemin accessed the human database records again, reading through files he had only glanced at before. What he found chilled him to his core. Humans had spent 10,000 years perfecting warfare. While other species fought occasionally and then made peace, humans had made war into an art form. They had studied it, refined it, passed knowledge down through generations. Every weapon the Indomitable carried was the result of centuries of research and terrible experience. When humanity joined the galactic community, they had been asked to disarm. They had agreed. They had taken apart their weapons and promised to be peaceful. But they had kept the blueprints. They had kept the knowledge. And they had built one ship, just one, that carried everything they had ever learned about killing. "Admiral," Taemin said quietly, "humanity didn't send one ship because they only have one. They sent one ship because one was all that was needed. This vessel is their entire history of warfare made manifest. It's every terrible thing they ever did to each other. Every weapon they wished they had never invented, all in one place." Hyunwoo couldn't look away from the display. The Indomitable was carving through the swarm like it was nothing. A single human ship was doing what millions of alien vessels couldn't. "How do they live with themselves?" he asked. "Knowing they can do this?" "By choosing not to," Taemin said. "That's what makes them remarkable. They have all this power, all this knowledge of destruction, and they choose peace. They choose to be kind, to be curious, to help others. They locked all of this away and hoped they would never need it again." In space, the Indomitable continued its pursuit. The swarm was heading for its central hive mind ship, a massive vessel that served as the brain for the entire collective. If they could reach it, they could destroy the swarm completely. "Captain, I'm reading the hive mind ship on sensors," Bora said. "It's massive. Easily 50 times our size, and it's heavily defended. Can we reach it before the reactor fails?" Daeho asked. Kyung-soo checked his displays. Warning lights were flashing across all his boards. "It's going to be close. Real close. And even if we reach it, we might not have enough power left to destroy it and get clear of the blast radius." Dr. Hae-won looked up from her medical monitors. "Captain, 3 crew members in engineering have radiation exposure. 4 more are showing signs of heat exhaustion from the temperature spikes. If we keep pushing like this, we're going to start losing people. Daeho was silent for a moment. He looked at his crew, these 57 people who had volunteered for this mission. They all knew the risks. They all knew they might not come back. "Subin," he said. "Opinion?" The first officer met his eyes. "We came here to stop the swarm. We're the only ones who can. I say we finish the job, whatever it takes." Around the bridge, the other crew members nodded. Bora's hands were steady on her controls. Kyung-soo was already rerouting power, stealing from life support and artificial gravity to feed the weapons. Hae-won was preparing medical supplies for casualties she knew were coming. "Then we finish it," Daeho said. "All weapons, full power. Bora, plot an intercept course. Kyung-soo, I need everything you've got left." "You'll get it," the engineer promised. "But Captain, after this we're going to need that tow the Admiral mentioned. One problem at a time." The debris field was massive. Pieces of the swarm's hive mind ship floated in space, twisted metal and dead organic matter drifting in the cold vacuum. Where the heart of the Varathian swarm had been, there was now only silence and wreckage. And somewhere in that debris field, dark and quiet, was the Indomitable. Admiral Hyunwoo stood on the bridge of the Pride of Keltharia, staring at the sensor readings. The human ship wasn't responding to hails. Its power signature was nearly 0. Life support readings were minimal. For all appearances, it was dead in space. "Send search and rescue teams," he ordered quietly. "Find them. And be respectful. They saved us all." 3 Keltharian rescue ships approached the Indomitable carefully. They had seen what the human vessel could do, and there was a strange fear that it might wake up and start firing again. But as they got closer, they could see the damage. The hull was scorched black in places. Several armor plates had been blown completely off. One of the engine nacelles was barely attached, hanging by a few structural supports. Coolant and atmosphere vented from a dozen breaches. It looked like the ship had been through a war all by itself, which in a way it had. The rescue team leader, a Keltharian named Won-soo, carefully approached the ship's main airlock. It was sealed, but there was emergency power keeping it functional. He activated his communication system, broadcasting on all frequencies. "Human vessel Indomitable, this is Rescue Team 1. Can you hear us? Please respond." Silence. Won-soo exchanged worried looks with his team. They prepared to force entry to cut through the airlock if necessary. Then a crackle of static came through the speakers. A tired voice, heavy with exhaustion but touched with dry humor. "This is Captain Daeho. We could use a tow." The rescue ships erupted in activity. Medics prepared to board. Engineers readied emergency repair equipment. And across the entire fleet, word spread like wildfire. The humans were alive. When the rescue team entered the Indomitable, they found a ship that was barely functional. Emergency lighting cast everything in dim red. The air was hot and smelled of burned electronics and coolant. Warning klaxons blared softly in the background, their power cells dying. They found the crew in the mess hall, which was the only section still maintaining livable temperature and atmosphere. 57 people looking exhausted, dirty, and battered. Some had bandages. Others showed signs of radiation exposure or heat exhaustion. But they were alive and they were smiling. Lieutenant Bora was unconscious, lying on a makeshift bed. Dr. Hae-won sat beside her, one arm in a sling, monitoring her vitals with a handheld scanner. "She stayed at her post during a reactor coolant leak," Hae-won explained to the Keltharian medics. "Breathed in some pretty nasty stuff, but she'll recover." Chief Engineer Kyung-soo was covered in burns, his hands wrapped in medical tape. But he was grinning. "Manually vented the reactor core into space," he said proudly. "Saved us from a meltdown with about 30 seconds to spare. Lost my eyebrows, but who needs them anyway?" Commander Subin sat in a corner, cleaning a rifle that she apparently kept in her quarters. She looked relatively unharmed but exhausted. When asked if she was all right, she simply nodded once and went back to her maintenance routine. Captain Daeho was drinking something dark and hot from a metal cup. Coffee, the Keltharians learned, a human beverage. He looked older than when he had arrived at Threshold, the stress of the battle evident in every line on his face. But his eyes were clear and calm. "Welcome aboard," he said to Won-soo. "Sorry about the mess. We had a busy day." Counselor Taemin arrived shortly after, insisting on being part of the rescue operation. When he entered the mess hall, he found the human crew laughing about their near-death experience. Kyung-soo was telling a story about how he had to use his belt to hold a coolant pipe together. Someone else was joking about how the gravity failed right when they were drinking coffee, and now there was a coffee bubble floating around engineering somewhere. Timon had seen many warriors after battles. Usually they were quiet, haunted by what they had done, but the humans seemed almost relieved. Not happy about the killing, but satisfied that they had done what needed to be done. He approached Captain Deho and bowed respectfully, the Keltharian gesture of deepest respect. "Captain, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I thank you. You saved billions of lives today. You saved the galaxy." Deho returned the bow, though his human version was less formal. "We did what we came to do, Counselor. Though I wish it hadn't been necessary. May I ask you something?" Timon said. "A question that everyone in the fleet is wondering." "Go ahead. Why did Earth only send one ship?" The mess hall got quiet. Even the injured crew members looked up, interested in how their captain would answer. It was a question they had been asked dozens of times, always met with deflection or humor. But now, in the aftermath of their victory, Deho seemed ready to give a real answer. He gestured for Timon to sit, and the Keltharian did. Deho took a sip of his coffee, gathering his thoughts. "Earth has thousands of ships," he said finally. "Colony transports, research vessels, trading ships. We have a fleet, Counselor, a peaceful fleet built for exploration and commerce. We didn't send any of those because they're not warships. They're not meant for fighting. But this ship is," Timon said. "Yes," Deho said quietly. "The Indomitable is the only warship humanity built after joining the galactic community. We constructed it in secret, against some of the treaty provisions, I'll admit. But we built it because we remembered what we used to be. We remembered the wars we fought, the weapons we created, the terrible things we did to each other before we reached the stars." He paused, looking around at his crew. "Every weapon on this ship is something we wished we had never invented. Every tactical system is a reminder of our darkest moments. We built this ship and hoped we would never need it. We hoped that our peaceful reputation was enough, that the galaxy would never face a threat that required this. But you kept it ready," Timon observed. "We did," Deho said, "because we knew that somewhere, someday, there might be something that couldn't be stopped with kind words and diplomatic solutions. Something that only understood violence. We hoped we were wrong, but we prepared anyway." Subin spoke up from her corner. "One ship because one ship was all we were willing to remember. All we were willing to acknowledge about what we used to be. Anymore and we might forget why we stopped." Timon was quiet for a long moment. "Your people are remarkable," he said finally. "You have the knowledge and the capability to be the greatest warriors the galaxy has ever seen. But you choose not to be. You choose peace even though war is so much easier for you." "Peace is never easy," Deho said. "That's a lesson we learned the hard way. But it's worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for. That's why we're here, Counselor. Not to conquer or to dominate. To protect. To ensure that peace has a chance to grow." Before Timon could respond, Admiral Hyunwoo entered the mess hall. His forearms were spread in a gesture of humility. He approached Captain Deho and bowed low. "Captain Deho, I owe you an apology," he said. "I mocked your contribution. I insulted your ship and your crew. I was wrong and I am deeply sorry. You and your people saved us all." Deho stood and offered his hand. "No apology necessary, Admiral. You didn't know what we were capable of. We preferred it that way. Peaceful species aren't usually threatening after all." Hyunwoo shook the offered hand. "The Galactic Council is convening an emergency session. They wish to thank Earth formally and offer you a position as a protector species. Your military capabilities would be invaluable to galactic security." "We'll have to decline," Deho said gently. "We're not soldiers, Admiral. We're people who remember how to be soldiers when we absolutely must. There's a difference." Timon nodded in understanding. "But Earth would accept observer status on the Council Security Committee, so you can advise us when situations like this arise again?" Deho looked at his crew, silently asking their opinion. One by one they nodded. "We can do that," he said. "We can help you prepare. Help you understand threats. But we won't be your army. That's not who we are anymore." Over the next few weeks, the Indomitable was towed back to Threshold Station. Engineers from a dozen species worked around the clock to repair it, treating the ship with a reverence usually reserved for historical monuments. Which in a way it was. A monument to what humanity had been and what they had chosen to leave behind. But Captain Deho politely declined most of their help. We'll repair it ourselves, he said, exactly as it was. No upgrades, no improvements. The Indomitable isn't meant to be a better warship. It's meant to be a reminder. The galactic community struggled with what they had witnessed. Some species wanted to adopt human weapons technology. Others wanted to ban even the knowledge of such things. Counselor Taman led the opposition to both extremes. Some knowledge should remain sealed, he argued before the council. Not because it's forbidden, but because it's dangerous. The humans understand this. They keep these weapons not to use them, but to remember why they shouldn't be used. If we take this knowledge, we must take their wisdom as well. And I'm not sure we're ready for that in the end. The council agreed. Human military technology would remain human. Other species could ask for advice, for strategic consultation, for help preparing defenses.